Good evening. Welcome to the Troy City Council meeting of January 21st, 2025. We please request that you silence your cell phones for the duration of the meeting. And tonight we will have invocation by Mrs. Snee. Is that correct? And then the pledge. Please stand.
Recognizing the different faith traditions in our community, I'd like to offer a prayer adapted from the Book of Common Prayer. Almighty God, bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations of the earth. To all in administrative authority, grant wisdom and grace in the exercise of their duties. To those who make our laws, give courage, wisdom, and foresight to provide for the needs of all our people. Renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. We commend to your gracious care all the men and women of our armed forces at home and abroad, and those in public service in our city. Grant that your Spirit may so move every human heart that barriers that divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatred cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Phillips.
Here.
Mrs. Snee.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mrs. Marshall. Here. Mr. Sievert.
Present.
Mr. Wooden.
Here.
Mrs. Westfall.
Here.
Mr. Pierce. Mr. Schilling.
Move to excuse Mr. Pierce. Second.
Moved to excuse Mr. Pierce by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Wooden.
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Pierce is excused.
Motion to excuse Mr. Schilling.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mr. Schilling by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Wooden.
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Schilling is excused.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, would you please read the minutes of the January 6, 2025 meeting?
Minutes of Council, January 6, 2025. Committee reports. Mr. Roselle provided the Committee of the Whole regarding ordinances number 05924 and 060-2024, reading both the majority and minority recommendation. Resolution number R1, 2025, authorizing sale during calendar year of municipally owned personal property which is obsolete, was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R2, 2025, ODOT cooperation for an urban paving program on West Market Street was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 059, 2024, enacting sections of the zoning code related to permitting one medical marijuana facility was postponed indefinitely. Ordinance number 060, 2024, enacting sections of the zoning code to permit one adult use cannabis operator recreational and B4 district was postponed indefinitely. Ordinance number 01, 2025, amending section 1143.17 of the zoning code was given first reading and was adopted. There was, following various communications, council adjourned at 7:23 p.m.
Move to accept the minutes as read.
Second.
Motion to accept the minutes by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mrs. Westfall. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Mr. Wooden.
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Motion is adopted. Minutes are approved.
Thank you. We will move to committee reports, and we will start tonight with community partnerships. Mrs. Marshall.
This committee met January 13th to the Ohio Municipal League challenge of AT&T's tariff application before the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. If AT&T is successful, other utilities could make the same filing with any governmental entity requesting the relocation and undergrounding of communications facilities existing in a public right-of-way, becoming responsible for paying the cost incurred by the utility company. This would have a negative budgetary impact for governmental entities. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the City of Troy to support the OML's challenge of AT&T's tariff application and any subsequent and/or necessary legal, administrative, and legislative efforts needed. Because of the dates involved with the OML filing, this committee supports emergency legislation. Respectfully submitted by Mr. Sievert, Mr. Twist, and myself as chair.
Any questions for anybody that didn't make the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
If I can give you an update on this.
Okay.
Still appreciate, and we still recommend that council pass this evening because the issue is still there. Just as an update, after our committee meeting last week, AT&T pulled their current petition in front of PUCO. They're going to refine it, but they did say that they were coming back with it in a slightly different version. And so having this resolution and this legislation available is still a priority for us, but the January 18th deadline that I had mentioned on Monday night is no longer applicable.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, moving on. Streets and sidewalks. Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just prior to reading the next two reports, I will remind everybody here, there is a committee process. And I know conversations occur behind the scenes and trying to work things out, but there is a committee process. And keeping at least committee chair for whatever committee, with whatever the item is important. So if we would do that well ahead of time, that might not create any heartburn in the future. And I know this is the second time that I've had to remind this council of this sort of thing. So if you would do that in the future, just give that some thought when you're having behind the scenes conversations. That would probably alleviate some tension. So moving on. So the Streets and Sidewalks Committee met on January 13th, and this is an amendment to the agreement with American Structure Point to look into a feasibility study with Main Street intersection and Experiment Farm Road. Committee members Phillips and Westfall met on January 13 to review amending the agreement with American Structure Point, Inc. for additional pre-design services of a feasibility study of the intersection of West Main Street with Experiment Farm Road and Stanfield Road. This study has been requested by ODOT prior to the city proceeding with authorizing the final design for this intersection improvement project, as discussed in the detailed report. And it was the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into an amendment to the professional services agreement with American Structure Point, Inc. of Columbus, Ohio, to perform additional pre-design work of a feasibility study for the intersection of West Main Street, State Route 41, and Experiment Farm Roads and Stanfield Road improvement project at a cost not to exceed $120,000. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Schilling, Mrs. Westfall, and myself as chair.
Questions?
I don't have a question. I do have a comment. As this issue has been bandied about a little bit, and we have two members of council that are not here, I have spoken to the chairman of this committee and to the member who is here, and I will be asking for a second reading of this so that we can perhaps gather some more information as well as get participation from the other two members of council for this particular matter, Mr. President.
Which is resolution for 2025, correct?
What's that?
Which is resolution for 2025.
Our
Correct.
Or for.
yes,
Yeah.
correct.
Okay.
I do have a couple questions.
Yes, sir.
I do apologize, I wasn't unable to attend the committee meeting where this took place. I just want to make sure I have a few things clear. So, the money requested is for a study and to see whether, what is going on out there, whether we want to move forward or not. But we are not committed to do anything else after the study, correct? I mean, if the study comes back and says, don't do one or at all, we don't have to do anything. If it comes back and says, hey, you need to put a roundabout in, we can consider it and do it at that point, but...
The study is not likely to say, don't do anything and leave it, since this has been a congestion issue probably for 10 to 20 years. I mean, it's been for a long time. What this study is a feasibility study. It's being required by ODOT, and it will use current data, current modeling, current standards that ODOT has in place to determine what the best alternative is. That could be a roundabout. That is not saying it's going to be a roundabout. There's no preconceived notion that it is, other than back in 2023 when the council authorized the grant. That was the recommendation from the consultant. ODOT is considering that. We thought that ODOT had agreed with the consultant. They've come back to us and said, we'd like more information. We'd like another simulation. We'd like to have some public input on this, to take that into consideration as well, and that's why the cost of the study is as relatively high as it is. It is, they could determine that a roundabout is not the best. They could determine that a widening of the intersection is a better alternative all around, or they could come up with something that we didn't even think of. But likely it'd be one of those two alternatives, roundabout or an intersection widening. But again, this is not steering it in any direction whatsoever. This is for ODOT to look at it and determine what they feel is the best for that intersection based on further study, new simulation based on current traffic movement, traffic volumes, traffic speeds, etc.
Can I respond to that real quick? Because I don't mean to stop into this, Mr. Twist. I had a number of questions today, and Jill was kind enough to spend, an inordinate amount of time with me today, so I appreciate your efforts. But maybe you could compile sort of what you and I talked about and disseminate that to us, and that might, whatever you have, Bill, I'm not trying to step on your toes, but I thought I became way more aware of a number of facts that I wasn't aware of from our discussion, and perhaps we could do something like that. I didn't mean to step on, is that okay with you?
Yeah, no, we had already talked about that, and we're drafting something right now. Mrs. Rhodes and the assistant engineer as well, Christy. Yes, sir.
If I may, I'm asking him for dispensation to cut in front of him. So would this necessarily necessitate another committee meeting? With the information that's coming forward?
You always have the prerogative to do that, and maybe after we send out the email with the additional facts, whether you want to or not, I think it'll just clarify some things that were discussed and maybe lost in the, all the back and forth on Monday night, and maybe it'll just summarize and clarify for you a little bit without needing a committee. But
if you want it, we'll send it back to the committee.
Yeah.
Well, if we did, I will not be here next Monday, so it would have to be in 2 more weeks.
But we're not in any...
We are in...
a little bit, aren't we?
Yeah, we discussed that, whether it was possible to go a second reading, and it is. We do have time frames that we have to follow. This is not just an ODOT project, it's an ODOT managed project with federal guidelines and timelines. And so the further that we push this, the closer we get to those timelines that we don't want to get to. But we'll endeavor to answer as much as we can in the email.
Do we have any kind of a timeline of when that might be coming?
What is the timeline?
Well, maybe tomorrow. Either tomorrow or Thursday at the latest.
Okay. All right.
They'll print it up, you can read it on your trip.
Mr. Twist?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Twist.
No. I was just clarifying, you kept saying they. They is ODOT is requesting this
Oh,
study.
yes, I'm
and
sorry.
we're using
Right.
the American Structure
American
Group,
Structure Point is the engineer that did the original study
and they're going
for
to
us.
do the study to help present that information to ODOT
And to the public,
and to the
yes.
public. Okay.
Correct.
It's- We
Did
kept
we-
using they.
Did we have a feasibility study done when they originally did their presentation?
We had
And
done.
ODOT's wanting to update
We
it?
had done a safety study, we had done a simulation, we've done a couple of components, originally, starting in, 2019. And when it was, authorized, it was, using data that, ODOT, as I mentioned earlier, wants to see updated. Also, they've tweaked their software, and their standards and their, assumptions. And so that's why they want us to present new data.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question. Is this
Yes.
the same consulting firm or whatever that recommended the roundabout
It is,
over,
it is.
on Dorset and Cape?
Is it the same one?
Dorset and
McKay.
Maine.
Is it Dorset and Cape or the Presbyterian?
Experiment Farm in Maine. They're the ones
No,
who
are
did the
they the same-
original. Oh, they
I'm-
did Dorset and McCaig?
Yeah.
I
was just curious.
I thought that was LJB, wasn't it?
We worked with LJB, they were the prime consultant, but we worked with American Structure Point to lay it out. So they were a part of the team, but they weren't necessarily the recommending
Who's our group for the Staunton Adams Street one?
Staunton Adams. Sorry. It is American Structure Point.
Okay, yeah. Anything else?
And just so I'm clear, they're requesting this or requiring it?
They're requiring it.
Requiring.
Yes.
So we
For us
have
to
to
move
do it.
forward,
That's
we-
what I thought.
Right,
That
that's
we
correct.
we didn't really have a choice about it. We had to do it, right?
That is probably true. That's a clearer way of saying it, yes.
If we want the grants.
Yeah, if we want to move, if we're going to move the project forward, we need to get their approval. Their approval depends on that study being done to their satisfaction.
Any final questions? Not at this point. When we get done with the committee reports, you can. Mr. Phillips, you have another
No,
report?
thank you.
That's the only one? Okay.
That's it.
No, there's another.
We have come to
Yeah.
the point where the citizens can come up and ask questions and give you 2 minutes.
No.
I've got another.
That's what I thought.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You said no,
Sorry.
okay.
I thought you were
Yes.
just looking
No,
for comments. Okay.
No.
So item number 2 with the Streets and Sidewalks Committee. Committee members Westfall and Phillips met on January 13 to review amending the, sorry, didn't forward to the next report. Again, Mrs. Westfall and I met on January 13 to review the proposed 2025 paving program. The program includes several roadway sections and the list is attached. It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2025 paving program at a cost not to exceed the $1.5 million. Again, this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Schilling, Mrs. Westfall, and myself as chair.
Any questions on the paving program? Thank you, and sorry for the confusion.
That's all right.
Now we have reached the point of where anybody in the audience can come up and address anything that's on our agenda. You come to the podium, give your name and address for Mrs. Knight for the record, and you will have 2 minutes of this portion to ask your questions and make your comments.
My name is Kay Katharina Friedley. Nice to see all you folks. My first meeting here. I just had a question. So the way I understand it about the intersection Experiment Farm in Maine.
Before you get going, she also needs your address.
Oh, I'm sorry. 1143 Scott Street, Troy, Ohio.
Thank
you. Okay. Anything else?
Now you're good.
Okay, I'm good. So it sounds like Troy started the project, and wanted to look at that intersection, Experiment Farm in Maine. Was that because we were having accidents there?
Accidents are one aspect of it. This is an issue that actually was highlighted, I don't know, probably 18, 20 years ago, that, you know, at various times we have backups that go clear past Walmart. With the expansion of Honda to the south, with the addition of Pella, with the continued growth of Maryville and the industrial park area there, and with some additional development going on to the west on Main Street. All of those factors, as we look, you know, we're continually looking at our long-range transportation plan. We identified, again, 20 years ago, several sections in the area of the intersection where we know that various parts of the roads need to be expanded. Once you start looking at expansion, then you always have to look at the intersection. The way the federal process works, you get into the pipeline way early, years and years early, and you work your way through long-range plan. Then it becomes part of a transportation improvement plan. Then it becomes study after analysis, and then finally you ask for money, which we did in 2023 with the hope that we would have been awarded in fiscal year 2028, which would actually been available mid-year 2027. We were awarded funding for the following year, and so by 2029 is when we'd actually be looking at constructing. So there's you can see there's a decades worth of planning that goes into these, and so that's when that started.
Okay, yeah, and that sounds kind of similar for most government things. Thank you for answering my question.
You're welcome.
Okay, and I didn't quite understand the thing about the tariff. Can you explain that? I know you read a statement, but maybe just break it down into regular people's language.
Sure. So AT&T being one of the utilities in Ohio, there's a process at the state level. The Public Utilities of Ohio, PUCO, regulates the rates that AT&T, among other utilities, can charge. There's a state law in place that when there are municipal projects, actually local projects that involve expenses related to relocating lines, burying lines of the utilities, that those are not charged back to local governments. There is a provision, though, that the PUCO can grant a tariff, what they call a tariff, to a utility that would enable them to charge if they'd want to, but once they do, they're always going to want to, right? Charge the municipality, in our case, the city of Troy, for the cost in advance of doing the work of their costs, AT&T's costs to move any kind of utility lines, be it burying or just relocating them, anything related to any public project. One that comes to mind could be the phase, it was done during phase one of West Main Street project, where we built the duct work underground, and all of the utilities did then bury their lines. That part of the project did not have any cost to us. AT&T filed a petition around the holidays, December 18th, I believe, with PUCO to ask them to grant them the tariff to allow them to start charging us and every other municipality or local government. And there is a 1 month, 30-day window that if nobody appeals or objects to that, then it would automatically go into place and they'd be able to start charging. Well, we caught wind of it, actually, the Ohio Municipal League that represents municipalities across the state, they follow those actions at PUCO and the state legislature, bills, et cetera, and they alerted us to it and said, you know, this is obviously bad for municipalities. You know, the utilities, they have adjusted their rates a long time ago to take care of, you know, to absorb the costs, any of those costs that they would otherwise incur. And so now they wanted to, on top of already having the rates in place, also then be able to charge us again for that. OML has been willing, like they've done on other statewide issues impacting local governments, is prepared to file a petition protesting that tariff. AT&T recognized that there are a lot of unanswered questions that OML and many municipalities have been asking them in the last few days, if not weeks. And so they've decided that they're going to pull that petition at this point, but they've made it clear that they're refining their petition and they will be filing it sometime early in 2025.
Okay, well, that makes a lot more sense, and I'm sorry, I just didn't quite understand everything on that. That's pretty much all my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Relax. Steve Hendrickson at 975 Dickerson. I just got a question on the $120,000 new study. Is that just going to present to the state data, or will it include a recommendation on different options?
If it's run the way the last one is, I'm getting a head shake by or a head nod, I guess, by Mrs. Rhodes, that it would include a recommendation, and that would be, pardon the colloquialism, but spit out from the analysis that's done. But it will also be informed by a pretty comprehensive public involvement aspect. We will have an on-site meeting. There will also be a virtual component for somebody or for folks that can't be at the meeting but want to Zoom in or Teams in or whatever they're using now. So that will be part of that process.
So it's likely that study is going to have at least one or two recommendations to the state. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. The other thing I'm concerned about is between that and the Main Street improvements. One of the things you got to be careful of is what happened to Dayton 30 or 40 years ago. The merchants downtown, David Reich and the Bierman people, wanted to make sure 75 went through downtown, so it would bring customers to downtown. And that worked for a while. They didn't realize it was a two-way street. Those same interstates that brought customers there took customers out of town. So don't think for a minute that what we're talking about is going to say, oh, everybody's going to get off the interstate and go downtown. That may or may not be the case. We don't know. And the other thing is, before you get too carried away, the price of this thing keeps going up. So if it's a roundabout, maybe you ought to put a fountain in the middle of it so people can go there instead of downtown. Last week I walked through downtown. There was an awful lot of empty retail space, which concerns me a great deal, because I don't see any initiatives. I'm worried about it because I don't know what's going to happen to bring those businesses or more businesses downtown. I already had one jeweler has already moved to the other side. I don't know what's going to stop people. So let's be careful we take care of what we already got instead of spending. So far we authorized $620,000 on this thing, and with more to come. So let's make sure we don't create a reason to leave downtown. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Anyone else? Moving on to ordinance, or resolutions. Mrs. Knight, could you please read Resolution R3, 2025, please?
Resolution number R3, 2025, a resolution supporting the Ohio Municipal League's challenge of AT&T's tariff application at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio and declaring an emergency. This has been discussed this evening. First reading.
Move to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall.
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt the resolution by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, could you read R4, 2025, please?
Resolution number R4, 2025, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to enter into an amendment with American Structure Point, Inc. of Columbus, Ohio for a feasibility study of the intersection of West Main Street with Stanfield Road and Experiment Farm Road in the City of Troy, Ohio. The cost of the study not to exceed $120,000. First reading.
Mr. President.
This will go to a
Second reading,
please.
fine.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips.
Second reading. Moving on to Resolution R5, 2025. Mrs. Knight, could you please read that one?
Resolution number R5, 2025. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2025 paving program, cost not to exceed $1,500,000. First reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Phillips, second by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westfall,
Yes.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden.
Yes.
Move to adopt. Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips,
Yes.
Mrs. Snee,
Yes.
Mr. Twist,
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall,
Yes.
Mr. Sievert,
Yes.
Mr. Whidden,
Yes.
and Mrs. Westfall.
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Having no ordinances tonight, we will move to communications. Is there any this week, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, just a reminder about filing the financial disclosure statements. You received information from the Ethics Commission on this, I think, last week.
Thank you very much. Mayor Oda?
I have nothing this evening, thank you.
Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Law Director, Mr. Kerber.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would just, it's going to be cold tonight, open up your cabinets to get some air in there, maybe drip the water a little bit, and just try to save on any burst pipes. It's a lot easier to prevent it rather than to fix it.
Mr. Sievert.
Thank you. I have just a few things. One, again, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to Jill Christie for our discussion this morning, or I guess this morning. Second, I didn't know this store existed, so I'm going to hopefully pass a little bit of information on to people. But when my son was in town for Christmas, he got us a vinyl record player, as he's into vinyl. I saw Mr. Whidden at Resignation Records, but apparently Troy is well known in the area for having one of the best vinyl record stores. It's across from the old Troy Daily News building. And I don't know what that exact address is, but it's on the other side of the street. The guy's name in there was Mark. He was very knowledgeable, a good guy. And so if anybody is into vinyl or the resurgence of vinyl, as my 24-year-old son indicated. It's cool to have a store downtown that offers that. And then on a more serious note, to some extent, as a number of you guys know, my father was a fireman for almost 30 years. When the weather is like this, please keep in our thoughts and prayers the first responders, the firemen, the policemen, the trashmen that are out picking up our trash this morning. I saw them at, I don't know, probably 7:30 this morning, 8 o'clock, and it was dark and well below freezing. There are a number of people in this community that are out and about in this weather, and we owe them a debt of gratitude and to keep them in our thoughts and prayers.
That's it. Mrs. Sneed.
I don't have anything this evening, thank you.
Mrs. Westfall.
Nothing this evening.
Mrs. Marshall.
I do.
All right.
I wanted to congratulate Officer Chris Baker on his retirement, 25-plus years of service for the city, and wish him well.
Mr. Whitten.
I would like to congratulate my alma mater, the Ohio State University, on winning the college football national championship. That is all.
Well, I'm glad.
Not representing Texas or anything, but
No,
Mr. Phillips.
I'm a little sad after that, but I'm very happy that the Bucks won this last night, and I could breathe again after the game. That's all I have.
Mr. Ohio State Twist.
Yeah. Ditto to Mr. Whitten. Nothing else?
Mr. Kerber.
No, I already had my shot.
We had your shot about 5 minutes. Okay.
Public service.
Don't shoot the messenger. I promise to ask these questions. They're not necessarily criticism. They're just questions to change. And since Jill's here, we'll direct it to Jill. On plowing, just curious. There's some observations sometimes. It doesn't look like do we try to plow down to the pavement?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because sometimes it looks like, and I know Main Street, the main drags will definitely get down the pavement with the traffic. Okay.
Yes, and we have rubber tipped plows
Blades.
because, if
You don't want to pick it up.
we could pick not
Yeah,
only the ice, but if the ice is in cracks, then maybe the asphalt comes with it.
Because, overall, you did a great job, I think. And the guys were out. You hit the cul-de-sacs extremely early, particularly on the first one. I know we utilize other departments as well as the dump trucks, which is great. Second of all, a couple calls, couple references over the wonderful, maybe the wonderful article that was pushed out about ticket revenue. Is there any parking ticket revenue? Is there any city capacity? Is there any one thing that's causing it to be lower, or just?
I apologize. I don't read it.
Okay. Well, it was comparing the drop off in ticket revenue, and it was along the lines of stuff we've had discussions in the budget thing before, whether meter maid, no meter maid. I'm sorry,
or
ticket
meter
patrol
man.
guy.
Meter man.
Yeah, meter man, whatever we got this week. Did the light go out?
So this trend really started when council changed reduced significantly the amount of timed parking on street. And so what we've pretty much focus on more than not are incorrectly parked vehicles on the street, including those that are not staying between the lines,
as opposed
or
to the time that they're there.
Yes, because we eliminated a lot of spaces having any time limits as a convenience, and by and large people have been very positive about that. The businesses and the feedback that we've gotten downtown is that they appreciate having the parking control officer out there, not to harass people, but to make sure that there is sufficient turnover. as well as that longer cars, or I guess trucks, aren't still sticking into that driving lane, which can be a significant hazard. So, yes, we're writing less tickets. There are less violations out there. But, it's a service that we've always subsidized, and every year, especially since the council changed the timed parking, that I've noted that in our budget discussions in November.
Okay, because I know Chief McKinney was here a couple months ago, and either before or after me, he was talking about the number of warnings they've given to, I don't know whether it's on, I can't recall if it's on parking or not, but thank you very much on that one. The last one, how's our Main Street project? Is that on schedule? Jill?
Yeah, our Main Street project's on schedule. Obviously, it's kind of shut down with this cold temperatures. But once the weather comes back, we're looking, depending on when winter kind of breaks, and it looks like long-term, and no snow on the ground, obviously, and ground's not frozen, get some concrete done for sidewalks. And then once weather breaks permanently, we'll be able to get the road ground down and then get it resurfaced. And then we also obviously have Dorset Road in the intersection. The bases are in. I think we're just waiting on pole delivery. And then we're also looking into the street lights. And we're waiting on cost back.
And the second question is on that. We have from phase one all the way out to Ridge, and then from Ridge or to the railroad tracks, we have the black poles like we have downtown. Are the black poles going to be consistent from downtown to the interstate?
I was not.
We are not. We discussed all of this several years ago when the project was finalized and designed and finalized for bidding. At that time, wooden poles, which are what are up there. We are looking at an alternative because Miami Valley Lighting owns those poles, and so we have a schedule of basically leases that we use them for. They do have a couple of options for aluminum poles, and so we are looking at the incremental cost of upgrading the wooden poles to the aluminum poles. They don't have a black pole option similar to what we have out there. Those were custom, and they had quite a long lead time. I want to say 9 to 12 month lead time to order those.
I think the main concern was, or a majority of that concern was metal, aluminum versus the telephone pole. Since we've deemed this as being our main entrance, we've buried all the utilities. For lack of better terms, you can stand on the overpass, look downtown, you see the courthouse without seeing 18 zillion utility wires. But if I'm glad we're going to the alternative, seeking out the alternative, because otherwise you're no better off than what we have in Westbrook or Southview or whatever.
So,
and you have an inconsistent project.
Sure. So just let me, on the record, clarify. At this point, we have asked Miami Valley Lighting to give us the additional cost. At that point, then we would come back to council to get your approval, because those costs are anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 because there's a significant amount of poles there. And so we will bring those to you, because there's some installation costs, and then there will be an incremental increased cost in the general fund for operating that we pay every month for the street lights. And so we'll share all that with you and make sure everybody is in favor of doing it.
That should answer the questions for right now. Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you.
And Patrick. Audience comments, further topics, to finish any topic you started before.
Good evening. My name is Deb Hogshead. I live at 421 South Plum Street here in Troy. Today is the 15th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, a ruling that opened the floodgates of big money into political campaigns. We can and we must close the floodgates. I'm here to encourage Miami County citizens to support the We the People Amendment, which will soon be introduced in the 119th Congress. The proposed amendment continues to gain traction in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it makes two things clear. One, money spent on political campaigns is not protected speech and shall be regulated. And two, only natural persons have inherent, inalienable constitutional rights. Corporate entities created on paper through a chartering process do not. Billionaires and large corporations spend money to buy access to our representatives, Democrats and Republicans alike. Access gives them the power to influence laws, policies, and regulations in ways that put profits over people. Ohio, for example, has opened our public lands to the fracking industry, despite protests of local residents and activists concerned about the dangers to public and environmental health. But the problem isn't just big money in politics. We must also end the misguided doctrine that a corporate entity has inherent, inalienable constitutional rights. Starting back in 1886, the U.S. Supreme Court has been granting so-called constitutional rights to corporate entities, and not just First Amendment rights to the exercise of free speech by spending money on political campaigns. The Supreme Court has also ruled that a corporation has a First Amendment right to not speak about such things as chemicals used in fracking fluid that may leak underground and possibly contaminate water sources. A Fourth Amendment right to privacy and refusal of surprise inspections. A Fifth Amendment right to be compensated for future profits lost as a consequence of government restrictions, even if those restrictions protect public welfare. And a 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the law, which means a local government like Troy cannot enact laws that favor locally owned businesses and family farms over wealthy multinational corporations. Corporations are necessary, but they should benefit all of us, not just shareholders and CEOs. Corporations should be subordinate and accountable to the public. The proposed We the People Amendment is key to ensuring subordination and accountability. And we invite those who agree with us to sign our petition at movetoamend.org/motion. And before returning to my seat, I'd also like to add that Heather Sturgill of Troy had an excellent op-ed piece published today in the Dayton Daily News with the headline, the online headline was different. But in the published paper today, we must push back against unchecked corporate power. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at that if you get the Dayton Daily News. And if not, go online and look for it because it's an excellent op-ed piece. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Only other comment? Thank you to the organizers and Charlotte Remmert and the rest of the organizers for yesterday's Martin Luther King program. Yes, it might have been condensed or shrunk because of the cold, but it was a good program. Lunch was good, and thank you, that committee, for continuing to do what they do on that observance of Martin Luther King Day. With that, we are adjourned till February 3rd, 7 p.m. Thank you.